All right. According to Save the Child, statistics shows that over 1 billion children are at risk of the effect of climate change. And funny enough, about 1.85 million of these children, according to Save the Child Network, after 2022 are in Africa and they suffer the risk of, climate effects after 2022. Now, when we look at these statistics, it shows that, well, there is work to do. How do we do this work? How do we fight this fight? How do we come together and collaborate and make sure that we are able to save these kids? Because you would agree with me that children are one of the most vulnerable when it comes to climate issues in and around the world. And this is me saying, welcome to African Climate Stories Forum. This is a place where we talk about every single thing that has to do with climate and environmental justice. And what we try to do is to make sure that we have a roundtable where we can all come and have conversations and make sure that we have what I call to action. We are not just talking, we're not just having conversations, but we are also making sure that we are, taking actions even after all of these conversations. Because believe me, all talks and no work will only take us probably way back or centuries back. So there is a need for us to back up our actions, of course, after all of the talking. It is my delight to say that I am yours truly, Felicia, and today we will be looking at something strategic, just like I said at the beginning, something that has to do with children and advocating for them. And today we'll be looking at standing up for children in the climate crisis. And this will be a guide for young advocates. This is just our way of saying, hey, it's time to talk about these things and bring to light some of the things that children go through and help to just mirror some of the things that we can do to make it better. Of course, I will not be doing the talking. Mine is just to ask that question that is on your mind. I get. And of course, we are collaborating. This forum and this particular episode is in collaboration with Early Childhood Development Action Network. And this is just us saying, hey, let's come together and let's do something that is worthwhile. And today we have three wonderful gentlemen on the panel, and we'll be discussing, just like I said, standing up for children in the climate crisis, which is a guide for young advocates. And the first person that I will be reading out the profile, trust me, these profiles are mind blowing, is Brad. Mr. Brad, it's wonderful to have you join us. I hope that you can hear me. Can just unmute before I read out your profile and say hi to our audience.
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear.
All right, perfect. So Brad is an experienced government relations professional. He's a trainer and advocate who has successfully developed and executed initiatives in the US and, of course, in global issue campaigns and advocacy programs. Now, during his career, Brad has built several advocacy programs for several nonprofit organizations. He has led the planning and implementations of campaigns across a range of policy issues and pioneering inventive strategies, to assess, measure, and evaluate campaigns and advocacy organizations. Thank you so much, Brad, for joining us this evening. And also, I have on this call Dr. Fambasayi. He is a passionate champion of children's rights and climate change. He is a leading African Early Childhood Network work stream on ECD and climate change. He has a global outlook and having previously worked with leading international and Pan-African child rights organizations, driving law and policy reforms, campaigns, and advocacy across Africa. He was appointed an extraordinary research fellow at the South African Research Chair in Cities Law and Environmental Sustainability, Faculty of Law, Northwest University. He has previously served as an independent external expert in the Working Group on Children's Rights and Climate Change of the African Union Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Children. He currently serves as a board member of the Association of Children's Museum. It's wonderful to have you, Doc. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, loud and clear. Thank you for having me.
All all right, thank you. So the last person is Mr. Abdoulie. He is a West African Science Service Center on Climate Change and Adapted Law Use, WASCA, PhD Fellow in Climate Change and Education. He is a lecturer in the School of Education at the University of Gambia and also the country coordinator of KIXGP DRC Research Project. His research is situated in the field of climate change and education, with a special focus of impact of climate change in education, early childhood education, special needs in education, educational technology, measurement and evaluation, and renewable energy. He is an education specialist with over 17 years of experience working in both public and private sectors, contributing to the advancement of the educational system in the Gambia and across Africa. Mr. Abdili is absolutely amazing to have you on this call.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
All right, so let's go right into it. Like I said, wherever you're joining us from, of course, I'm yours truly, Felicia. Anywhere you're joining us from, remember that you can drop your comments. Okay, you can, if you have questions or the panelists said something that you're able to drop the inputs. All right, question, of course, is when it comes to advocacy of any sort, we usually want to know why. We usually want to know, what did you see? What happened? Is there a spectacular story that is pushing you to want to ask this question? So the first thing I would love to ask is to, first of all, I'll start with you, Breath. If you can tell us about, of course, Childhood Development Action Network, and why you've chosen to prioritize, children's rights when it comes to climate change.
Yeah, thank you so much, Felicia. It's really great to be here with all of you. So first, just a little bit about ECDAN. We were formed in 2016 with the World Bank and UNICEF, as well as 80 other partners, really to catalyze collective action for young children and families. And we're a global network of more than 350 organizations. So please visit our website to learn more. We'd love for you to participate in our work. In terms of the why, I think climate change is a fundamental threat to child rights. It threatens their opportunity to grow up healthy and happy and thriving. We can't not engage in climate change because of that. And so we obviously bring the perspective of early childhood. And what we see is that young children are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, right? And all children are impacted, but it's the younger children that are especially and disproportionately impacted. And so consider young children breathe twice as fast as adults. So it really puts them at risk in terms of respiratory illnesses and from air pollution and other means. They have a higher metabolism, so they sweat less, which means they're at increased risk of heat stress. They have immune systems that are not fully developed, and so it's more difficult for them to fend off disease, which is are on the rise due to climate change related factors. And then, of course, they're really susceptible to the dangers of extreme weather events, right? Because they're really dependent upon others. And so, they're uniquely at risk. But also, there's a flip side to it, which is, young children can be uniquely powerful. We have lots and lots of research that shows when you invest in early childhood development, it has really positive short and long-term outcomes. It delivers better education results. It builds resilience, which is absolutely critical when we're talking about how do we adapt to climate change. And the third thing I'll highlight too, in terms of why, is young children are really underrepresented in these conversations at the government level, at COP, at national level governments. As entertaining perhaps as it might be for my 3-year-old to be represented and speaking at COP or at a government meeting, we know life doesn't work that way. We know that's not realistic. And so the The challenge is that young children, particularly, are just not well represented in these conversations. And so we need to represent them and ensure that their voices and their needs are part of these conversations.
All right, thank you so much. I love the fact, like you said, there is a need for representation, and that is a very important wise. But then I would love for Dr. Fambasayi to speak from a point of experience on why we have to prioritize children's rights when it comes to climate change, and then talk a little bit about African Early Childhood Network. And then Mr. Abdoulie can take over from him.
Yes, thank you. The African Early Childhood Network is a platform for championing collaboration, championing children's rights, influencing policy and practice on the continent in Africa. And the primary focus is to look at, younger children from 0 to 8 years, but it goes beyond, of course, in terms of influence in policy, in terms of influence in practices. And it also links to caregivers and parenting and positive parenting and so forth. And the climate crisis, when we look at it, it is a children's crisis because there is no aspect of a life of a child that is not influenced, that is not impacted by the climate crisis. And when you look at it, like what was said by my colleague Brett earlier on, children can't speak for themselves. So in terms of policy formulation, in terms of policy review, in terms of investment, in terms of debates in parliament, they are not there to speak for on the impact of the climate crisis on their rights, on their well-being, and on their interest. So you look at the impact that perhaps my colleague is going to speak to, issues around how destructive the climate crisis has caused to schools, to early childhood centers, to homes, and to communities. And that impacts on the day-to-day well-being and development of a child. So that's quite critical to link it to rights. Why do we link it to rights? Because rights are enforceable. Rights are entitlements. Rights gives children the ability to demand from their governments for them to act. So without rights, we can't use flowery language. Let's use the terminology that it is a children's rights crisis and governments ought to act and governments ought to do something about investing in the climate crisis. And I'll mention one of the critical issues that we see on the African continent, the fragmentation of policies that go to the left, speaking to environmental impacts, climate impacts. On the other hand, you see a parallel line of education laws and policies and perhaps ECD. And these, they don't speak to each other. You have the Department of Environment or the Department of Climate Change in a specific country. And you also have a department focusing on education and early childhood learning. But those don't speak to each other. And what we have seen is that there's an emerging trend to ensure that there is collaboration within governments, to ensure that they act. And a rights-based approach is the way to go. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I think you've all said it right. The climate crisis or the climate protracted crisis are becoming very evenly distributed in the continent, especially the sub-Saharan Africa, which is barely facing the highest heat of climate and protracted crisis. So therefore, the young children and women who are the most vulnerable to this climate change impact definitely needs our attention, our care, to be able to alleviate and support them through this care, especially the marginalized group. So therefore, it is the right time for us to come together, sensitize people, bring to their understanding some of the impact the climate change is exacerbating on their life, on the livelihood of children, most especially the younger children, so that the world can come together and improve the livelihood of these children so that we can have a brighter future for them. Without this, some of the challenges that young children are faced with will definitely have a long-lasting impact on them. And so therefore, their learning, their livelihoods, all will be affected. And so therefore, the world will be at a blink of a terrible situation in terms of climate crisis. So therefore, we call on everybody to support and give time to understand the climate context in order for us to build on strategies of adaptation and to support. Thank you very much.
So, when we talk about advocacy, yeah, we usually think that it's something that it has to be very elaborate. It has to be very cumbersome. It has to be something, extraordinary. So I want us to break it down by, talking about some of the methods. What are some of the methods that we can employ to sort of engage young people to speak up, to start speaking up for children, and how climate change affect them? What are some of the, I want you to break it down. I don't want us to use very big vocabularies. I want us to use simple words that people can grab, just that can help, some of these advocates that want to launch into children advocacy. So what are some of the methods that we can employ so that we can engage young people to speak up for children and how climate change affect them? I'll go from doctor to Adulai, then I'll go to Brat very quickly.
Thank you. There are so many methods that young people can use, but specifically those who are in a position to be invited in platforms where they can speak evidence-based. It could be evidence-based research, because now we see child-led research coming up demonstrating the impact of the climate change. So, for example, with what we have now, we can leverage technology and social media platforms. And those become a powerful tool for us to push the agenda on the impact of climate change. So, when you speak about COP29, there is conversation on loss and damage. And loss and damage, we see it in our communities. And we have pictures in our mobile phones, we have videos, we have things that we can see and articulate properly to say this is the level of impact. So one of the strategies then is to leverage technology to push the agenda on the need for governments to act. I always say the need for government to act, because one of the key target audience that we have when we're doing an advocacy strategy or we have an initiative is for our governments to take action, for our governments to reform laws, for our governments to invest money in alleviating the challenges that are being caused by the climate crisis. So engagement is one of the key things, because it might be difficult for one to travel from Nigeria or from Zimbabwe to go where these meetings are happening. But when people gather together virtually using social media platforms, their voices are elevated to an extent that the call to action will be heard by authorities and those in power. I want to mention that only, but then there's another one which is critical, if you may permit me to highlight, that in instances where action is being done through social media, some are getting to an extent of using climate litigation, taking your governments to court. We have seen that happening, young people taking the government of South Africa to court, for approving a coal-powered station, which is going to affect the health of every child by air pollution. We have seen that happening in Uganda, taking the government to court for not investing in the rights of children. And that is a powerful way to put governments to account and say, be accountable in ensuring that investments are in the best interest of future generations and the best interest of every child. So those are two that I might mention now for purposes of pushing the agenda, and I'll leave that to my colleagues. Over to you, Jadama.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I think this climate crisis are all well discussed during the COPs. And so therefore, like you said, the technological dimensions are very paramount indeed. One of those elements that have been looked at, besides that, it's the indigenous strategies and community engagements that could definitely elevate the understanding of the local people and also inform them about some of the early warning systems that could help them and elevate their loss and damage properties through such climate shocks and impacts, which definitely can help them also build their future mitigation strategies in order for them to be able to adapt well to some of the climate shocks and impact that could be coming at any time. And so therefore, governments are urged to also build on investment strategies for climate financing, especially some of these local communities that are prone to some of the environmental impacts and damages. As a result of that, when climate impacts occur through extreme events, they are heavily heated. So therefore, those climate financing mechanisms will also help elevate their status and living conditions, and therefore their children will also be a little bit beneficiary to some of this climate financing, and will help support, improve their livelihood and their learning conditions. And the situation of the marginalized groups will definitely be improved. So basically, building on the early warning systems for the local communities, be it the fishermen, the farmers, other entrepreneurial skills that have community-based links or at forest levels, are definitely important for a collective approach in order for all stakeholders to improve the adaptive capacities of local stakeholders, the livelihoods, not only the government, but involvement of local stakeholders and the expatriate quota will definitely enhance the climate understanding and knowledge in order to mitigate some of the climate impacts. I believe that's a right, it's a step in right direction, and therefore will definitely improve our livelihood and supportive mechanism. Thank you very much. I hand over to Ada.
I can just add a couple of quick comments. I agree that the young people are particularly well positioned, I think, to drive this legal strategy. And I think it's a critical one that you're seeing emerge in more and more countries. And so there are organizations that are helping to coordinate these approaches. So I do want to highlight that because I think that's spot on. And then just to build on the comments around engagement and ensuring diverse stakeholders are at the table. I mean, I think it's really incumbent upon people in our position, as well as decision makers in power, to ensure that there are safe and inclusive spaces for engaging youth. And we have to be really purposeful about ceding that power to others and to bring them to the table. We also need to use our platforms to provide resources and skills building and key messages and that sort of thing. And so, ECDAN is certainly committed to that because we need to make sure that advocates are armed with the data and with strategy and messaging. So really need to think about, how do we shift from this model of participation to a model of representation, right? And I think that's been a challenge within this space, particularly where you see more and more youth engaged and more youth participating, right, in places, in platforms like COP. But is that a meaningful participation? Are they working directly with their government delegations? In most cases, that is not the case. And so how do we sort of shift that dynamic to really focus on what it means to be represented at these spaces? And it means breaking down the system and breaking down the processes bit by bit.
All right, it is for me. I'm getting a lot of pointers as to why and I hope that you are also taking a lot of notes down. If you're just joining us, this is African Climate Stories Forum, where we try to talk about, climate and environmental justice and how we can just, take actions and make the world a better place. And I think if that now, we can do a lot of work. And today we are looking at everything that has to do with child's rights when it comes to climate issues. And we're just looking at how we can guide young advocates to begin to talk about and justice. And remember, like any of the panelists said, some want to clarify, please do well to drop your comments. I would love to read. And remember to state your name and where you're joining. Quickly, we would take comments from our audience so that we can also carry them along. But before we do that, I would like to ask, when it comes to climate conversations, I would like to start with you, Brath. For someone that is looking at it from outside of Africa and you've been inside of Africa when it comes to climate conversations. What are some of the roles that you think that young people can play in amplifying the voices of children, when it comes to climate issues?
Yeah, I mean, I think the bottom line is we need to organize collectively, right? We need to build the political will and the political momentum that is needed to change our course and invest in new policies. And so, part of that means really, in terms of as an advocate, part of that means you have to understand the policy process. Right now, there are some really important mechanisms happening both at the global and the country level for climate change. Loss and damage was mentioned. There's a fund that focuses on that. But there are opportunities at the country level in terms of developing climate action plans. And it's going to it really requires some detective work to figure out, okay, what is this process? Who are the key decision makers at each step of the process? And so arm yourselves with that knowledge, because that's how you'll get engaged. But there are lots of things you can do. Help to raise awareness through letters to the editor, op-ed, social media, share the evidence and data. And, you can look to organizations like all of ours to get that evidence and data and the local evidence and data that you need. Participate in meetings. And again, think about what are those opportunities to organize and mobilize. Link into these existing initiatives within the community and country level. Think about how you can connect to the grassroots movements in your country. Be part of that movement. And figure out where there's political momentum being built so that you can be at the table and be part of those conversations and really help to sort of raise awareness, but also engage with government, engage with key decision makers. And I think I need to recognize also that in some governments, this is a more open process than others. But again, that's why it requires a little bit of detective work to understand, all right, what is the pathway for engagement? How do I get my voice to where my voice needs to be heard? Over for me.
All right, you mentioned something that is very key. You talked about knowledge, you talk about evidence and data. It is very essential. Very quickly, I'd like to ask you, Dr. Abdoulie, because you're someone that has interaction with young people, and you are someone that also interact with people that are industry experts. Okay, so let's go the other route. Yeah, what are some of the things that we are doing wrong when it comes to climate conversations and children's rights? What are some of the things that we are getting wrong in some of these conversations? Because sometimes if you don't know what is wrong, you cannot know what is right sometimes. So being someone that have close interaction with young people, can you highlight some of the things that we have been doing wrong, or some of the things that we have been saying wrong, or some of the approaches that we've been taking as a role that we think, oh, probably me doing this means I'm amplifying, but I'm not? So what are some of those things? Let's take that route so that we could just have a robust conversation. Can you all hear me?
Yes, but it looks like he's frozen.
Okay, yes. Okay, so Dr. Fambasayi, I think you can also answer that because you have interaction with young people. So what are some of those things? Young people, we have the zeal, we have the ginger, like we love to call it here in Nigeria. We have all the ginger, you understand? So what are some of those things that we are doing wrong when it comes to amplifying, voices in climate conversations?
Yes, I think there's a lot of things that work on the basis of the context that you are coming from. And in the African context, being confrontational with the government has proved that it doesn't work perfectly well. And we have seen how our African governments react to young people when they are protesting. One of the approaches that I believe work perfectly well, and I think this is the approach that's normally used at the African Union level, at the United Nations level, is constructive engagement. to find ways where you become an ally to support the initiative of government. And this is not to say that the government is doing everything right. In as much as the government is failing, but it's commendable to use constructive dialogue in terms of pushing the agenda. Thereby, you are working together with government to achieve the vision of that government. And we've seen that many governments have Vision 2030, Vision 2050, Vision 2040, whatever vision it is. Those are the national priorities that the government is putting on the agenda, putting on the table, and that's where they're putting their money. So it is imperative then to really work hand in hand with governments to ensure that the agenda is pushed. Then I think the second thing that comes to mind when working with young people is that sometimes we don't leverage on some of the movements that we have in our countries. For example, there is power in working within faith groups. It doesn't matter which faith, but faith groups are listened by government, especially when they are coming together as a collective and using those platforms. And we have seen some of them, they have funding to support safeguarding on the environment, issues to do with animal welfare, issues to do with the climate change and climate crisis. So those are some of the platforms that can be used, working together with government. And I'm not saying that the confrontational approach doesn't work, but I'm saying look in your context, understand your government, how it works, how does it interact with young people, and then adopt the best strategy that then can help you to push the agenda, working together with government and other stakeholders in your country. I think I will stop there and then pass over to Jadam.
Mr. Abdullah, are you with us now? Is it me or his network?
Thank you very much, Dr. Ronge. Yeah, I think I agree with both of you. Some of this. Yes. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
I
I can
can.
hear you.
Okay, please go ahead.
Could any of you hear me?
I think his network. We can hear you. Okay, I think his network is really so let's move ahead, and I would love to. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, you
Back.
broke up for a little bit, but I can
Can
hear you
we
now.
hear me now?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, network itches. Okay, so I quickly want to take comments from YouTube just to carry, our audiences along so that they will know that we can hear them live and direct. Remember that you can drop your questions, you want clarity, or you want, seek advice, or you have a particular advocacy journey you're on and you're stuck when it comes to children. You can as well drop your comment on YouTube. We are here just to answer all of your questions, and we'd just like to take a few comments so that we can see if we have questions. Okay. Why that is being done when it comes to young people, because in Nigeria there's what we call the Sorosoke generation, and what it simply means is the woke generation, the generations that love to speak out and talk and have all of those things, um and it becomes somehow so bad that we um just want to talk about everything in a way that we want to confront. So one of the things that we said here is to avoid that. Work on that very quickly. So I also want to ask you, as someone that have, as people or organizations that have dealt with young advocates, what are some of the things that you have for young advocates? What are some of the things that you would love to say to them? What are some of the things you would love them to avoid, or what are some of the things that you love them to do more? You know, and what are some of the things you love them to stop? What are some of the things you want them to project? Okay, let's just advise young people from, and I want us to talk from our wealth of experience. I'll start with you, Brath. Can you talk from your experience as a way of giving advice to young advocates and just giving them a guide to doing this advocacy thing?
Yeah, first let me
I don't know
say,
if you get my question.
yeah, sure. First let me say keep it up and thank you. I think, when I look across, I work for a global network, and I look across from a global perspective, I can't think of a single issue that has generated more passion, interest, et cetera, in terms of climate change from youth. It really is amazing, the groundswell of mobilization and grassroots advocacy. And so it's terrific and it's wonderful to see, and it's really, really important. So keep it up and thank you is first thing I'd say. The other thing I'd say is I go back to my comment earlier. Know the policy and political landscape. Know the policy process and political landscape in your country. Be the detective. You have to understand what the policy process looks like in order to influence it. And so don't just shout at the moon. Know where these moments are. Know how to engage strategically, and be solutions oriented. Right? Come to the table with ideas and solutions. Don't use platforms to vent. Use them to bring ideas to the table. And again, like, it's incumbent upon advocates and it's incumbent upon decision makers to create these processes and platforms for young people to engage and to engage in meaningful ways. Use those moments. Come to the table with solutions, and it's one of the most important things that sort of shifts the conversation. I've seen it a lot where, advocates, young and old, use these opportunities to vent and express frustration, and that doesn't move the needle. What you need to think about is what will move the needle in terms of decision making, and that really is policy solutions, and it's political momentum, political support behind those ideas. Over for me.
You said something that just struck me right now, and it said to come with solutions. We know it's okay. I think it's okay to vent, but then after your venting, what next? What are you going to do next? Are you just going to vent and leave the table, or are you just going to vent and also prefer solutions to some of these things that we are facing? Versus some houses in Africa, for narrow things down to, quickly, Mr. Adlai, I want you to give advice, okay, from your own perspective, and interact with young advocates. Give advice to them, like what should they do strategically. Some of the red zones that they have, some of the routes they can take to, chide
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, good. I think from the perspective I will be discussing from is both from advocacy and expert perspective in terms of youth
creating youth awareness, in involving them to be able to support the young children. Many a time, all our countries have nationally determined contributions, and these NDCs engage youth people or youth organizations to be able to contribute towards some of these climate agendas or called Sustainable Development Goals 13. So therefore, engaging some of these trained personnel and also youth organizations who are passionate about some of this agenda would be a strategy to better emulsify and increase the agenda of your motivation strategies in attaining some of the advanced mechanisms for you to be able to reach out to some of these local people and organizations. So therefore, I want to believe reaching out to some of these youth organizations or youth-led groups that are always in the grassroots engagement or after community people would definitely enhance a strategy towards selling out your ideas as an expert or reaching out to the grassroots communities for them to be well aware and informed about some of these climate impacts and mitigation strategies. So therefore, if they are well informed and trained, they could definitely enhance information sharing and preparedness of these young, because they live within the communities, they live with their parents. As parents and communities are informed and their commitment are improved towards this climate agenda, young children are obviously going to copy and follow some of those strategies, and this will definitely enhance and elevate their status in terms of climate impact. I think those strategies could definitely also enhance the climate impact mitigation and adaptation for an improved adaptive capacity of local communities and young children for that matter. Uh, my network is not very stable. I hope you could hear me loud and clear. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, perhaps just to build on what you were highlighting, Jadama. I think one of the key issues as well is to understand the power in collectivism. Not working in silos, not working alone. It's important indeed to have working with organizations, but it's also critical that work organizations work across each other, trying to benefit from the strength of one network, one organization to the next. And one of the things that I recommend for young people is for you to work with established systems. For example, across many countries on the African continent, they have what is called child parliamentarians or junior councillors or whatever structure where the government is investing in and where the government is actually, giving a listening ear to this group of young people. Work with them, identify them, use that as a strategic opportunity to speak about the climate crisis and put forward your concerns through such platforms. It's important that we speak on our own and seek the government to listen to us. But it's also much more important to also put our voices through, institutions or structures that the government is already listening to, like child parliamentarians. I think that is important. And when you do that, you are already participating in the co-creation of solutions. You are being part and parcel of the solution and not being part of the problem. I think that's one critical advice that I can give to young people to say, work with others, don't work alone. There's a phrase that says one hand washes the other. It's because we can do it collectively, we can do it together, and no one can achieve if they are doing it alone. Thank you. Over to you.
Yeah, I love the fact that you said don't work in isolation, and it's one of the mistakes that I've seen advocates make over and over again. We always want to take the spotlight. Oh, Felicia is the one championing this. Felicia is the one championing that. I think that in a way limits us. And if there is anything I'm taking away from this table right now is the fact that we should not work in isolation. I want to take you quickly outside of some of the questions that we have already. Dr. Fabsayi, you work in the research department somehow. I would like to ask you, yeah, do you think or do you feel that we have enough research or researchers working in, climate advocacy when it comes to children's rights? Do you think we have enough research? Do you think we have enough resources to help advocate? And if we do, how do we, utilize them? And if we do not have enough resources, what are some of the things that we can do, to begin to have young people actually researching on some of these things and bringing out things for us to work with?
Yes, we do have, you know, considerable research on the climate crisis. And at the global level, I think experts have come together and they have demonstrated the impact of the climate crisis globally, in Africa, in Asia Pacific, in the Caribbean, that we have seen. And it's pitched at the global level. And this conversation, we are speaking from a national level, from a community level. That's where I feel that young people have a strategic opportunity to demonstrate through child-led, youth-led research, speaking to what's happening with their communities. And remember, we mentioned earlier on that research is about, of course, articulating these policy issues. But research can also be linked to using photography, using video, using voice, messages to articulate the impact of the climate crisis in Mozambique or in Zimbabwe, what you are seeing happening with floods, because that's how we can then document and demonstrate to our governments to say the impact is huge, the impact is unbearable, and it's affecting, different children at different levels. Of course, one of the challenges that we then encounter when you want to do child-led research is to say, how do we do capacity building for young people to do ethical research and to ensure that we are safeguarding their interests and they are not being attacked by corporates? Because sometimes you get to speak about something in Nigeria, but corporates have huge interest in that issue. So it means that you are putting your life in line or in danger because you are getting in line of corporates that have the funds, and you want to speak about that. So child safeguarding becomes also a critical issue. And I think one way to go about it is to work with institutions and organizations in our countries. It could be UNICEF, it could be Save the Children, some of these partners that are working across our countries, to then become part and parcel of them, become an ally, become a youth advocate working with them, because that way you are also ensuring that you are sticking to ethical consideration, you're getting the capacity building needed. And when the research is out, there's also the process of dissemination, the process of ensuring that validation workshops are done, you are engaging the relevant stakeholders. And if you can't do it alone, of which it's difficult, like I said earlier on, you need to work with institutions that are already established. So I think I'll close by highlighting the need then to work within established systems. But we should not wait until they are coming to us. Let's use what we have. Let's use our mobile phones. Let's record what we see happening in our communities linked to the climate impact. And that is the evidence that we want to build on. That is the evidence that we can articulate and then bring forward as evidence-based solutions. Yes, over to you.
All right, thank you so much for that. Very quickly, I would like to, if you can take comments and just appreciate people that are joining us from all over the world. If you can have that displayed so that we can just appreciate them and thank them for joining. And if, well, of course, I always like to reintroduce African Climate Stories. We are a platform that is promoting African stories by Africans. And peradventure, you're listening, you're an African, you've been doing, climate justice, environmental justice stories. We have what we call the African Climate Storyteller of the Month. You can just reach out to us and we'll be able to see how we can, help each other out. And I have Excellent Kids Media, and she said that method of advocacy, yes, child and climate change, effective dialogue with government and stakeholders. This is more relevant to the African context. Of course, yes. I think in Africa, dialogue is always like the right approach most of the time when you're speaking with government and all of those things. Let's see if we can have more comments from our audience, just to see, just as a way of carrying them along, and we are being inclusive. um In the meantime, while that is running, okay, perfect. Okay, I am Idris Abdugani Ishola. I am an educationist and as well as an online media journalist that specializes in climate change journalism and anything relating to environmental sustainability. Thank you so much, Mr. Idris, from joining us. I believe you're joining from Nigeria. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for listening. And I hope that you've been able to pick a thing or two from all the things that have been said. So very quickly, Brath, I would like to take you outside of what we have prepared. COP29 is coming, and there are going to be a lot of conversations, and I've seen this happen over and over again, where we go to COP, we sign agreements, but then there is no backup to there's no backup to the things that we are doing or we are saying. So I'd like to for you to state some of the conversations that you would love to see happen in COP, some of the policies you are hoping that will come up, some of the policies that you hope that government and countries will begin to implement very quickly so that we can round up this session.
I mean, from my perspective, I would love to see early childhood be a higher priority within the negotiations and within climate financing. So somebody, I think it was Abdoulie, mentioned loss and damage. There's a fund called the Loss and Damage Fund. It's the details are a little bit vague at the moment, but I would love to be able to see investments in early childhood as a means for building sustainability for young people. Because we know that if there's targeted investments in the early years, it has a lifelong impact. It can change the course of a child. How more important is that, right, in this conversation around climate change and the impact that'll have? I'd also love to see, moving away from COP, which feels very distant, I think, to most people, there are opportunities at the country level. National adaptation plans were mentioned. Essentially, that means what are countries going to do to contribute to addressing the impacts of climate change? These are plans that are developed in countries. This is an opportunity, again, to sort of bring to the table the need for investing in programs and services that support children. We need to look at education. We need to look at health systems. These are moments and these are opportunities that can lead to concrete investments. And the only way to get there is to continue the advocacy, to ensure that these messages are being delivered to the decision makers that have power over where these policies are moving forward.
Okay, because we're racing against time here, and very quickly, Dr. Fabsayi, I would also want to, get your last words. I hope you can hear me. Also like to get in your last words and then some of the things that you just love to see change. What are some of the narratives that you love to see change? And what are some of the things that we need to start doing? I know we've said a lot, just like a way of wrapping up everything that you said. What are some of the advice? What are some of the things that you say to young advocates when it comes to advocating for child rights when it comes to climate issues?
Yes, thank you. I think one of the most important things that I want to highlight is to say thank you for the work that you are doing. This is a different generation. These are different times, and I think the power that we have seen coming out of young people is incredible, and I think it's something that is quite commendable. And I want to also highlight that because of that, continue doing what you're doing and do it in a safe way. Do it safeguarding your well-being because it is critical for you to be an advocate for climate change and the climate crisis. But you are more important when you are alive. I'm speaking in the context of the African continent and some of the challenges that we have seen, in protest and how government sometimes can come forcefully. You are more useful to the campaign. You are more useful to the agenda if you are alive. So do it safely. Do it in a way that then will continue pushing the agenda And it is commendable in the way that we are coming together and collectively pushing the agenda on the continent. Thank you.
All right, you said something that is very key. You should do it in a safe way and do it while alive, okay? And above all of the advocacy that we are doing, what is most important is to make sure that you are safe first, okay? Safety first as advocates. And I don't know if Abdullah can hear me. I don't think he can. So I'll go to Brad very quickly. Just summarize everything that you have been talking about. And also, please, can you also talk about how we can prevent? I'm an advocate and I'm listening to you, Brad, and I want to reach out, or I have a story, I have a work that I want to share with you, and you could very quickly share how I can reach you as a person and also reach you as an organization.
Yeah, just in terms of the latter question, visit ecdan.org. We have resources on climate change for advocates. And please, feel free to email us with your stories, info@ecdan.org. We'd love to hear from you. And you're exactly right. What we need to be able to do is lift up these stories from youth advocates, these stories of impact. And so just to sum, I would agree with Dr. Rongedzayi in that, the momentum that we've seen on climate change from youth is inspiring, and it's exciting to see. And so keep it up, but be safe. And again, I think use these platforms and opportunities as a moment to build credibility for your message. But know your message, do your research, know the policy process, know the decision makers, know the evidence. If you are able to do those things, you will build credibility. And that is the most important thing in terms of being an advocate, credibility. And the only way to do that is by knowing what you're really knowing the issue and knowing the moments in time to influence others.
All right, thank you so much. Abdullah, are you with us now? Do you just want to take your last words and how prevention I can reach out to you if I have area of concern as a young advocate?
Yeah, sure. I'm available online in LinkedIn, Abdoulie Jadama.com, and many other platforms. If you want to link with me, especially on youth advocacy, uh, early childhood education, and also expert knowledge on climate change, we are available. And I want to echo the same sound of my colleagues that in reaching out to the masses about climate change, try to know the policy dynamics that exist in context of where you are, in order for you to be able to communicate some of these elements of climate change, because these are sometimes very, very indigenous elements that help support to build up your strategies in order to be able to reach out to the masses that need your attention, and clearly articulating them for their consumption is also very paramount. We all look forward to a similar one like this one, and we congratulate you for breaking the silence in the climate action. Thank you so very much. Over to you.
All right. Thank you so much. And very quickly, Dr. Fabusai, how do we reach you? Or I'm an advocate, I want to research and I want to connect with you very quickly.
Thank you. I'm available online on LinkedIn, on X, on all social media platforms, and I use my last name, Fambasayi. But we can also reach us on the African Early Childhood Network, where we can engage more, and then we can see how we can support each other to bridge the policy gap and support the work on the African continent, because there's a lot that needs to be done, and we need to do it together and collectively. Thank you.
All right, I think the central message here is that you cannot do it alone. You can't fight this battle alone. You need to do it together and then connect with people that are doing the same. I think there is power in the collective. Believe me, there's power in the collective. So let's do it together and let's do amazing work and let's fight for the rights of children all over the world. Thank you so much, Raz. Thank you so much, Doctor. And thank you so much, Abdullah, for doing this. Believe me, personally, I've learned a lot. And I believe that every single person that has joined us has learned a lot. A big shout out to Early Childhood Development Action Network and, of course, Africa Early Childhood Network for this collaboration. Thank you. And I also look forward to having more conversations because this is just one part of the entire conversation. Believe me, we've not even talked about policies. We've not talked about the effect of climate change on children themselves. We've not even begun to dive into some of these topics. So I look forward to discussing and having this panel again and discussing some of these things so that we can make it better for our children, for my children, for your children, and just to make the world a better place for them to live in. Thank you so much once again. It has been amazing. Remember, this is African Climate Story Forum, and you can follow us across all social media platforms at African Climate Stories. Thank you so much for doing this with us, and make sure you have an amazing time. And remember to be environmental climate conscious. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thanks, everyone.